the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, March 1st, 2023. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Meron Rapoport, editor of Local Call, on both the melee in Huwara, the occupied territories, and the so-called judicial reform bill that is making its way through the Knesset. Also on the program today, ProPublica reporters J. David McSwane and Ryan Gabrielson on a fraudulent Christian HealthCare program. Also on the program today, conservatives on the Supreme Court seem ready to deny 43 million Americans college loan debt relief. Lori Lightfoot out as mayor of Chicago, loses in the election. There will be a runoff between a neoliberal and a progressive. Biden to nominate Julie Su, a progressive labor activist, already the number 2 at the Labor Department, to be labor secretary. A Mississippi law now bans gender-affirming care for under 18-year-olds. Iowa, meanwhile, is looking to ban gay marriage. Eli Lilly caps out-of-pocket costs of its insulin at $35. New polls show Trump handily favored over DeSantis now. House hearings call for increased accountability for Ukrainian arms. IAEA report says Iran enrichment of uranium is near bomb grade now. That nuke deal was a big mistake to leave. New report over the past decade, 96% of political extremist killings have been perpetrated by right-wingers. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for joining us. Emma is out today. We got a lot to get to. Let's just start with this. There are reports that, and I mentioned this yesterday, Angus King is trying to get together a group of senators, along with another Republican. Angus King, of course, is an independent from Maine, to get together with some Republicans in an attempt, I guess, to negotiate some type of debt ceiling increase that would involve a cut to Social Security in the form of raising the retirement age. You should know that in the 100 years or so, really 90, I guess, 84 years in which Social Security has been operative, the actuarial tables show that longevity has increased. However, that is mainly for, exclusively for, broadly speaking in terms of statistics, people living in the upper end of the income spectrum, 50% or higher, at least in the income spectrum, for an increase in years lived. We have a mechanism to deal with people getting Social Security when they don't need it. And the way that we have to deal with that is called taxation. Because you don't know that you don't need Social Security until you're ready to retire. But at that time, the U.S. government can know how much money you have and have made and continue to make, maybe, and they can tax you on it. If you believe in means testing, then you believe in progressive taxation. And not only that, if you believe in government efficiency and you believe in means testing, you believe in progressive taxation. It is the most efficient way to mean test any type of government program that we have. And that way, we don't have to do it on a program by program basis. We tax wealthy people and we provide benefits to all people. And that way, we are providing so-called means testing. It's the most efficient way. If that's what you care about, if the reason why you care about means testing is because you want efficiency and you don't want rich people getting benefits from government that they don't need or don't deserve, in your opinion, the best way to do any of this is to provide universal benefits and tax wealthy people more. And that goes for free college. That goes for student debt relief. That goes for Social Security and Medicare and food stamps and whatever it is that you want. Mortgage interest tax deduction, not so much. But you can reclaim that on the other side in terms of income. With that said, with the preface that there is, nascent talk out there by some in the Senate on how are we going to cut Social Security. Here's Joe Biden speaking at an event in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And the moment we saw this on the State of the Union, in that one moment, we weren't covering the State of the Union live, were we? We were? I can't remember. I was too drunk. But in that moment, we did say, this is huge. To get the Republicans on the record saying, we're not going to cut Social Security and Medicare, to argue that they're not doing it, to yell and scream.
How dare you?
How dare you, sir? Was a great moment for people who don't want Social Security cut. And here is a prime example of why.
I've been around for a lot of State of the Unions. I never saw one where the president got to negotiate in the open with everybody. I was pleased to see so many Republicans stand up. Remember when Marjorie Taylor Greene was yelling, liar, liar, Biden's a liar. I'm going to be good. I'm going to be good. They don't want to cut anything. When I asked, I said, okay, you don't want to cut anything. Everybody who says we're not going to cut Medicare, Social Security, when I asked them to join us and reject the cuts, Medicare, wasn't it something? They all stood up. They all stood up. And they're all on camera. Got all their pictures. Like I said, I believe in conversion. Maybe they found, as my grandfathers, maybe they found religion on Social Security and Medicare. I sure hope so, all kidding aside.
I mean, there it is. We said it was going to be deployed. He's going to be doing this every time he goes out and publicly speaks. Now, I also have to say, I don't know what they're giving him in terms of feeding him or giving him vitamins or what.
Different kind of vibe there.
But the guy is far more congenial, seems more energetic, seems like he's having fun. If there's some product associated with that, I want that. Because honestly, that clip of him, far more likable, effective, amenable than I think any clip that we've ever seen of him in years, ever, maybe. Honestly,
ask your doctor about Bidenify.
I mean, and then not only and folks should understand, I'm so excited about this because the idea that there is no more defense necessarily, or we should say there's always got to be defense in terms of defense of Social Security and Medicare. But the idea that the main front is no longer defense, but rather offense in terms of expanding Social Security is huge. And here's a prime example of that. Seb Gorka interviewing Donald Trump. Love this picture.
Great
of Donald
picture.
Trump. Interviewing Donald Trump. Using Social Security as a weapon against Ron DeSantis. And understand the dynamic. Well, here, go ahead.
Well, thank you very much. It's nice. And we have such incredible spirit and love out there. You see that in these polls. You know, you have people, they start and everybody thinks they're wonderful. I mean, look, Ron, who I know well, he tried to cut Social Security. He wanted to bring the minimum age to 70 or above. He wanted to cut Medicare. You know, that's not, when people hear that, they're not going to be voting for him.
No.
And he's certainly not going to win in a general election. But you're not going to win the Republican primary, in my opinion, either. He wants to cut Social Security. That's not good. And numerous times, you know, he's a disciple of Paul Ryan, and Paul Ryan is the worst. He's the worst. He destroyed Romney. Mitt Romney could have won that race, but Paul Ryan was a disaster as a pick. That was the wheelchair over the cliff, if you remember, the famous wheelchair over the cliff, which is what they stung him with, and it was very hard for them to get away from it. They didn't get away from it. So, you know, there's a tremendous amount of love out there. It's
okay. Yeah. Everybody loves Donald Trump, but this is, I mean, and aside from the fact that like all of a sudden now Donald Trump likes Mitt Romney.
He takes every chance he gets to take shots at Paul Ryan these days. It's very funny.
It's fantastic. It's fantastic. And, but the dynamic is this. You have Donald Trump. When Donald Trump says this about raising the age of 70, the Republican senators and the Republican House members hear it first. It does not reach, you know, it reaches the American public, but it does not reach the American public until way down the road. But the Republican senators and the Republican House members hear it first. And that freezes them. They're not going to do anything. But by the time it reaches the public, some members of the Republican Party may hear it. But those swing voters, to the extent that there's any, or Democrats, when they hear the words Social Security or Medicare coming out of the mouths of a Republican, they go and vote Democrat. That's just the dynamic, because the Republican Party has 100 years worth of history of trying to cut Social Security and Medicare. Well, 100 years Social Security, 60 years of cutting Medicare. And they're right. That's what they want to do. They just can't do it now. So there's a great dynamic here, a great opportunity for Democrats to pound the Republicans on this. Care of both all the morons who attended that State of the Union address, Republicans, and frankly, Donald Trump. The best thing I can say about Donald Trump is that he is aware of the politics of Social Security and Medicare. And because he has no ideology beyond a really just a fealty to corruption.
An opportunity.
And his own personal enrichment. He knows enough, like, you can't be
doing that. That's a wheelchair off the cliff.
Wheelchair off the cliff. And let's be clear, like, at this point, I want DeSantis to run only because Trump will continue to deploy this for months and months and months and make it impossible for Republicans to deal with Social Security, to try and cut Social Security and Medicare for years. All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to be talking to Meron Rapoport, editor of Local Call. He is in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv. Do we know? Okay, we will know that in a second. Quick break, and we'll be right back after this. Oh, before we do, I should. We don't have any ads today. However, a friend of show and a loyal listener of the program wanted me to tell you folks about this GoFundMe. There is a horse sanctuary in Chiapas, Mexico, apparently near San Cristobal de las Casas. It is run by a family, Sam and Stephanie. Sam is Cherokee, apparently like a horse charmer of sorts, which he learned on the Gray Indian Mountain Reservation. And at one point he was working on a racetrack years and years ago and decided he did not like what he was horrified by the commodification and the brutality that he saw with the horses. They have a small farm in Chiapas, which is really in the middle of nowhere. And no paved roads, no phone signal type of thing. And they house, at any given time, over a dozen or so horses, and use that, they have, adopted these horses essentially. And also they use them in terms of like therapy for people. There was a fire at their ranch. It destroyed their horse barns. Sam apparently has a serious illness. They are trying to rebuild, and they are looking for a GoFundMe. Their goal, I think, is $20,000. They're about at almost $7,000, and they have a family. You can go and read more about it, but it is the Save Rancho Evergreen Horse Sanctuary. We will put a link in the podcast and YouTube description. And right now, during our break, we will put up a QR code? Yeah, use this QR code. Just show your phone at it, and it will take you to the GoFundMe, and you can help these folks out. They're really, it's a special place. They're doing good stuff there. And they just had this sort of a tragic situation. So if you can help them out, by all means, do. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking to Meron Rapoport. Be right back. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report, with us via the Zoom ping, actually it is, in Tel Aviv. Meron Rapoport, he is the editor of Local Call, also a writer for 972 magazine. There's a bunch of stuff that I wanted to talk to you about, Meron, and we'll get to Huara in a moment. The Israeli government has taken in this latest election maybe the best way to phrase it is a far less disputable right-wing turn in its latest incarnation. Many of us, I think, sort of feel like they have been right-wing for quite some time. But you wrote a piece about how it is becoming increasingly difficult for Western countries to maintain the fiction that Israel is the lone democracy in the Middle East. Many people perceive their treatment of Palestinians as already having sort of like disqualified that imprimatur. But the latest round involving judicial review, essentially, or reform, as they're calling it, has really seems to be nails in the coffin. Let's just start with, tell us what is in the offing. What does the Netanyahu government want to do in terms of changing the relationship between the Knesset and the judicial system in Israel?
Good evening, good morning. Well, I think basically what they want to do is to change changing the balance is an understatement. They just want the Knesset that in Israel is completely governed by the government itself, giving the Knesset almost supreme power over the court, meaning that the court will not have any way in disputing or disqualifying or any law passed by the Knesset. And as I said, the ruling coalition is really is without real opposition in the Knesset. That means that the government will have almost unlimited power in Israel. And this, of course, is very frightening. Now, we will talk later maybe about Huara and what's going on in the West Bank, but I think for the Israeli public, the Jewish Israeli public, what is afraid of is really, there is here a feeling that its own way of life is being threatened, in the sense that secular Jews feel that they will not have a space. Liberal Jews feel that they will not have a space. LGB rights people feel that their rights will be threatened. So because this government is really a coalition of very diverse forces, but there are very fundamentalist, religious fundamentalists. There are very right-wing, nationalist, racist forces. So together, this mixture, there are very anti-liberal forces. This mixture together makes many, many Israelis, much more than anyone could have expected, go to the streets. Today we have seen quite violent clashes in Tel Aviv. We have, for the 8th consecutive week, we've seen hundreds of thousands every weekend going to the streets. It's really huge. And what's happening, and that is even before we're talking what happened in the West Bank, what is happening is, I think, even in the outside world, when this balance is being changed, when the Supreme Court, which had quite a large legitimacy abroad, seen as a bastion of democracy, bastion of the real proof, the living proof that Israel is a democracy. If this Supreme Court is being threatened, then I think many countries, and we've seen that in Netanyahu's visit to France, meeting with Macron, with President Macron, President Biden's statement, Secretary of State Blinken's statement. So we have seen really many outside forces feel that Israel will become a kind of Poland or Hungary. In fact, it's much worse, but maybe we'll go to that later.
Yes. Okay. And we should say, just for people who aren't aware of the structure of Israeli politics, the Knesset, and correct me if I'm wrong, 120 members of the Knesset.
Yes.
The law says 61 can overrule any Supreme Court ruling, which means you can't, like, it is basically, there's no, that's it. I mean, 61, the government has 61 members of the Knesset by definition. It's not like the United States where you could have theoretically a Republican majority and a Democratic president. It doesn't work like that in Israel. It's a parliamentary system. So effectively, the Supreme Court has no check or balance on. Now, will you tell us, just give us an example of how the Supreme Court has, both in terms of, and maybe less so, I think, in the context of Palestinians, but to some degree, but in terms of Israeli society, because I don't think that people are quite aware, too, that there is an increasing number, like you say, this government is reflective of both fundamentalist Jews and sort of ethno-nationalists. Many of them, frankly, who come from, who were, fairly recent Russian emigres, and they're coming from, an authoritarian state. Their perspective on democracy, this is not something that you just pick up, the next day necessarily. There is Israel has always had this balance of very secular Jews, and they're also being extremely religious, fundamentalist Jews. There's always been some tension there. Will you just give us a sense of like what the Supreme Court has in the past done in terms of like protecting rights of Israelis and theoretically Palestinians, so that people can understand the implications of this?
Yes, first of all, it's not only that with a 61 majority, according to the proposed law, the government could do anything. Israel does not have a constitution. There's no constitution in Israel, so nothing is guaranteed, nothing is protected, no right whatsoever, including the right to vote, is not guaranteed in any law. Theoretically, the new government, if this reform will pass, they could disfranchise people from their right to vote, and there will be no one that will help them. Now, the examples are concerned. Sometimes the rights of secular Jews against all kind of religious law. There was some kind of ruling concerning immigrants, African immigrants to Israel, asylum seekers, giving them their rights. There were also in the West Bank. Yes, it's true that grosso modo, the Supreme Court did not really interfere, but it did slow down many things like the separation wall, like sometimes house demolition, like deportation. Israel used to deport Palestinian activists in the 80s and 90s, and then it stopped also due to judicial intervention. So there are many examples here, and Israel was really founded as a secular democracy. I would even say more. The very fact of Zionism, what does it mean? It means that people, at least the way they saw it, came out of their will to the land of Israel, the Jews, of course, I'm talking about. And therefore, the system had to give them this feeling of that they're giving them the rights, that it is a model society. That was very important in the history of Zionism. From the very beginning, the first election to Jewish institution in Israel, then Palestine, under the British mandate, was in 1920. In 1920 are the first elections for a constituency of the Jews in Palestine. So the tradition, the democratic tradition, goes way back even before 48, even before the establishment of the State of Israel. So here we are talking about a real deep tradition, maybe not 100%, far away from 100%, because the way to treat Palestinians, whether inside the Green Line, that are citizens of Israel, and certainly those in the West Bank and East Jerusalem and Gaza under occupation. But yes, to Jewish Israeli citizens were given a feeling that their rights are protected by this very delicate system. And now, with the new law, the feeling is that they could do anything, and the fact that there are these fundamentalists in government makes many Israelis, Jewish Israelis, still fear that if there will be nothing that will protect them, even when they are asked, the leaders of this reform asked, okay, what guarantees can you give us? Can you give us guarantees that the right to vote will be maintained, that we will have an election every 4 years? They say, well, it's up to the Knesset to decide.
Right.
So even that is not guaranteed. So yes, there's a really big concern. And interestingly enough, it drew huge crowds and also outside leaders and the outside world also is looking with apprehension of what's going on.
There's an interesting dynamic here, because you wrote a piece about how, for instance, Macron, and I think he was, as an example, is now, sort of concerned about this notion of democracy. And on some level, there's also an awareness that this has been a fig leaf because of the way that Palestinians have been treated, both, as you say, on one side of the Green Line as citizens, on the other side as within an occupied territory. And I would argue that dynamic is in many ways a function of racism. In the same way in this country, at one point we could be talking about having a democracy, although Black people are not allowed to go into a hotel or, in the last century in this country and before. But you also wrote a piece a couple of months ago, I think even before maybe this reform started, and I wonder your perspective on this now, that the liberal left within Israel, which has been, at least in terms of like the Jewish liberal left in Israel, has been increasingly become a minority, is in fact a majority if they take a more expansive view as to what the fight is within that country. Can you talk about that idea and expand on it, particularly in light of this, now that they've been drawn in by this sort of almost like non-racialized, if you will, sort of affront on their on the rights within Israel?
Yes, this is a notion that I think still very few Israeli Jews understand, but I think they should understand. What I'm referring to is this right-wing government has declared in its principles that only the Jewish people have a right for self-determination in the historic land of Eretz Israel, between the river and the sea, between the Jordan River and the sea. So the right wing, is viewing the whole of the territory between the river and the sea as one territory under Israeli rule and with Jewish supremacy all over the land. Now, if you say, okay, let's look at this land. In this land, there are 15 million people, half of them Palestinian, almost even a little more, 50.4 or something like this. 50.4% are Palestinian and a little less than 50% are Jews. So there is a Palestinian majority. And if you take the liberal Jews in Israel and add them to the Palestinian, you have a clear majority between the river and the sea that oppose these right-wing racist policies. Now, it's a mentality that still most Israeli Jews still don't see, but because they don't see themselves as related to the Palestinian over the Green Line in West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem. But I think it's a right way to think about it. We have to think about it. And if we will think in this way, I'm talking about the liberal left, then we will understand that we are not a minority. We are a majority. And we can use this majority. We have to understand that the right wing, Smotrich, and he said yet today, maybe we will go to Hawara, he said in his words today, after there was this attack, this pogrom on Hawara by hundreds of settlers, he gave a like to someone who called for the destruction of this village, 7,000 people, Palestinian living there. And today he was asked about why did he gave this like. And now he said today, I think Hawara must be destroyed.
And we should say you're talking about Bezalel Smotrich. Is that
Bezalel Smotrich? He is the finance minister. He sits in the cabinet and he also is a minister in the Ministry of Defense. He is now responsible for all the civil side of the occupation in the West Bank. So he's saying, I think this should be the policy of the government to destroy this village, a village of 7,000 Palestinians. So yes, those people in government, like Bezalel Smotrich, like Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's a Kahanist, who was a member of the Kahana Chai movement, and now is a minister for responsible for the police.
the Kahanist, we should just say, our Meir Kahan was a sort of a radical fundamentalist nationalist too. I think. I mean, he was
racist. He was banned from the Israeli Knesset. He was the only one who was banned from the Israeli Knesset because he was considered racist by the Supreme Court. So they want to really to have a decisive victory. That's how they say it, decisive victory over the Palestinians, and lead them either to surrender and accept apartheid regime, living in inferior rights, or leave, meaning a new Nakba from 48. That is their policy. And the people who went to Hawara on Sunday are their people. I don't know. I cannot prove, of course, any direct connection, but they come from the same, way of thinking.
Yeah.
So yes, so they want the Palestinian out. Not, they don't want better rights. They want them out. So I think it's definitely not a democracy.
What I have noticed over the years is that the right wing in Israel, and even like not even the far right, like just Netanyahu, who I think in a vacuum I consider to be far right, but within the context of Israel is almost considered the center at this point. They and I remember a quote to this effect. They will make common cause with really right-wing fascists in Europe. They will make common cause with Christian Zionists in this country. And there was a quote that was from years ago, and I don't know if it was from an Israeli general or whatnot, but somebody had said to him, like, you realize these Christian Zionists, they want you to burn in hell. Like, I mean, their plan for Israel does not include you doing anything other than, and he said, I'll worry about that when that time comes. The willingness of the right in that country, and I think there's really not necessarily any inherent conflicts per se between the fundamentalist right and the ethno-nationalist racist right. There are some, but they seem to be rather small. But you would think that like maybe there's even more like with Christian Zionists or with fascist anti-Semites in Europe. They're willing to make that common cause to further their project. Yet they're like, what's it going to take for the Israeli liberal left to understand that the Palestinians have been the canary in the coal mines, and that they are their fates are intertwined in many respects.
Unfortunately, I think most Israelis, most of those hundreds of thousands who go to the streets every week, and this is very, very impressive, I must say.
Right. I mean, we should be clear. That's like 6 million Americans going out and marching every weekend in this country. 6, 7, 8 million. I mean, that would be huge.
It's huge. It's really huge, and they are persistent, and they are ready to fight. They are ready to confront the police, and this is very impressive. But unfortunately, I think most of those people going there do not really see the clear connection. It's not natural from them. But maybe I'm a natural optimist. I think that this is a two-stage issue. That first of all, and it's not even left, it's really center people that are going there. Really even center right sometimes, liberal right, are going there because they see the danger. I think now the fight is really to prevent this government from achieving these very dangerous goals that it set to itself. And the fight is in the name of democracy. That's what the protesters are chanting. They chant the most popular slogan is democracy or rebellion. So they fight for democracy. Yes, it's not the way I see democracy. I see democracy as I cannot see democracy living with occupation. I cannot see democracy living with discrimination against Palestinians inside Israel. But yes, once the issue is democracy, and once this issue will win over the right wing and this really frightful coalition of fundamentalists, ethno-nationalists, racists, and this coalition will be defeated. If it will be defeated, I think it will be a new start for many Israelis to start saying, okay, now we have to think how to strengthen our democracy, to think what does it mean, democracy, to think over the real deep meaning of this word. If you fight for it, then afterwards, you have to think, okay, what we have fought for. We have fought for democracy, so let's see if we have democracy. And I think inevitably, they will see the connection to what's happening in the West Bank. And what happened now in this week in Hawara is a good example where the same people that are pushing for this judicial reform are the people who went and attacked civilian in Hawara. And people are saying, okay, even more moderate Jews, not very liberal left people, even centrists, are saying, well, they want to impose the way in Hawara and in Tel Aviv. It's the same thing. And I think once there is this reckoning, and once, this very dangerous reform will be defeated, I hope so. It's not evident, it's far from evident, but it's a real fight. If it will be defeated, then I think there will be room for new thinking about what does it mean to be a democracy. It's like a huge, lesson in political science. Like Israelis are going to a very sophisticated and very short-term lesson in political science and understanding the basic meanings of democracy, majority rule. What does it mean? The rule of the majority. What does it mean? The dictatorship of the majority. What are minority rights? All these issues are on the agenda now.
I hope it works out that way. I mean, I couldn't help but think, the slogan democracy or rebellion could, for all intents and purposes, be democracy or intifada, right? I mean, on some level, obviously it's not a one-to-one translation, and the implication of intifada for a lot of those, sort of centrist, even center right, maybe even center, liberal Jewish Israelis, may mean something different to them. But from the ears of like an American who sees this from afar, there's such an obvious sort of parallel dynamic here. It's just that, it starts with the most marginalized and then it just works its way. Those same people have that same will to power. Well, Meron Rapoport, I'd love to have another conversation with you as this develops more. And particularly, with my sincerest hopes that light goes off on the head of those Israelis there who now realize that their fate has always been bound with the democratic big D, small d, I should say, democratic principles that Israel is either following or not following.
I will be happy to talk again, but I must say it is the most dramatic days that internally, I'm not talking about the first Intifada, second Intifada, or wars, or the 67 wars, or the 73 war. I'm talking about internally. It is the most dramatic days. These are the most dramatic days Israeli society have known, I think, since 48. Since 48, it has never experienced such a clash of civilization, of culture, of political cultures than we are seeing today.
Fascinating. Meron Rapoport, we'll put a link to your 972 pieces and local call. Really appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking to ProPublica reporters J. David McSwane and Ryan Gabrielson about a piece that they did on a Christian health nonprofit. You may have seen ads for something like this. I have over the years. And we'll find out if they all turned out to be somewhat scammy, where it's basically sort of like a Christian health insurance, but not really. And then sometimes a lot of these don't pay. So
it's like a public-private partnership, but with religious institutions.
It's more like a private partnership with religious institutions, but not really religious institutions. I don't know. We'll get more into this in a moment. We'll be right back after this. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. I want to welcome to the program ProPublica reporters J. David McSwane and Ryan Gabrielson. They have written a piece in ProPublica, a Christian health nonprofit saddled thousands with debt as it built a family empire, including a pot farm, a bank, and an airline. That is quite a title for a piece. Guys, thanks so much for joining us. David, let's start with you. Can you just explain, because I've seen ads for these in the past many times and have wondered, like, what is going on here? These, I don't even know what they're called necessarily. These Christian, like this one, you did a story about Liberty Health Share, but it is a sharing ministry or a sort of a Christian health sort of insurance. Like what are these things called?
Well, that's pretty close. So if you saw ads, you knew more than I did before Ryan called me. to talk about this thing that he was looking at. So healthcare sharing ministries are.
I listen to a lot of right-wing radio, I gotta say. So
Okay.
that's why I.
Yeah. I don't have time for that. But healthcare sharing ministries are essentially these nonprofits that are unregulated that look and act like insurance. So instead of paying like a premium each month to a corporation for insurance, you give money to this nonprofit and you expect that if you break your leg or you get sick, those bills will be paid. And it's really sort of taken from a tradition in the Mennonite and Amish communities of people who didn't really want to be involved in traditional insurance, and they just agreed we're all Christians, we'll take care of each other. And we found sort of starting really ramping up in the 80s. This particular family in Canton, Ohio, had found a way to commoditize it.
But Ryan, there are you mentioned a couple other examples in the piece of these type of things that also had some problems. Like what theoretically was the business model for this? Like, we're going to get 100 members and they're all going to give us $100. And then if somebody gets cancer, we're going to come up with like $1 million to provide. Like, how does that work? How is it theoretically supposed to work?
Well, I mean, as a business, in their original concept, it didn't work. It worked as a small group of people, sort of, largely healthy people chipping in, within a church community. On that scale, generally, it could work. On a large scale, it's insurance, but they, the main sort of motivating thing for people who are joining these is they're trying to stay outside of sort of the corporate world, which they don't trust, the government regulated world that they don't necessarily trust. They're trying to stay within a freer, a much cheaper. That's one of the big selling things, is that they're paying sometimes a fraction of what they'd pay in premiums each month. With the idea that it is, I'm a largely healthy person, I shouldn't have to pay very much. And I'm giving to a charity that isn't just giving money to shareholders. And the money is there just in case, in the unlikely event that I get sick or break something. Well, then this community of like-minded people will all take care of me because we're all Christians here. And even those who are not Christian sometimes are sort of reassured by the idea, well, this is being run. This is a Christian institution. They're not going to, scam anybody. But as is the case with most sort of industries that are unregulated, problems tend to pop up. Yeah,
it seems like it. There was this story centers around a guy named Dan Beers, but it starts, it seems, with Bruce Hawthorne, who is his uncle. David, tell us about who Bruce Hawthorne was.
So this is a fascinating character, a evangelical preacher in the 60s who, he sold his sermons in truck stops, via tape, and, sort of built a little bit of a following. He started what's called the Barberton Rescue Mission, which was really aimed at helping men deal with alcoholism, and was just running that charity, for a few years when he experienced a tragedy where he was driving his family to Michigan. They were broadsided by a truck, and he lost his wife and a child, and several kids were injured. He shared that news in a newsletter that sort of went across the country, and the response was people sent money, checks and cash, to help him pay his bills. And it sort of dawned on him that, maybe I could scale this and turn this into something. I could be an intermediary and we could have sort of a national thing. And so was born HealthShares as we know them today. And it was a fascinating thing because insurance, you have to deal with state regulations. You have to do state to state, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Cigna, United Healthcare. They can't just sell the same thing to everybody across the nation. But if you're a health share, you can. So there's tremendous opportunity to bring in a lot of money. And it operated this way for a while. And it was pretty small. No one really cared. State regulators started to notice, and they really got ahead and hired a lawyer and started lobbying. And started to change state laws actually to protect themselves. And it was really in the mid 90s when his nephew, Dan Beers, who you mentioned, joins the operation, and they start to figure out how to take money out of the nonprofit and move it into for-profit operations that they controlled to amass great wealth. And we found, a similar blueprint was used in Liberty HealthShare, a couple of decades later.
Yeah. So, Ryan, tell us about how Dan Beers comes in and does that. Like, or I guess maybe give us first a little bit of a sort of a 101 course on like what a nonprofit can and cannot do generally. I mean, that's the thing, is that, like, people don't think that you can make money working for a nonprofit, but you can. It's just that the entity can't make money, right?
Well, even the entity can. So at the end of the year, lots of nonprofits come out with more money at the end of the year than they started the year with. That's technically a form of profit, but what you can do with that money is supposed to be regulated. And there's also rules on how much you can pay executives. So you're not supposed to be able to use it to just, enrich yourself. Along the same lines are rules about self-dealing, where you can't take the charity's money and just give it to a business that you own. Well, at least. So
in other words, I can't set up a nonprofit, take donations, and say, like, you know what? We just one of the things that we like at this nonprofit is podcast subscriptions, and so we bought 10,000 podcast subscriptions to the Majority Report. That's just what we did with the nonprofit. That's part of our mission.
You could do that.
You could potentially do that if you can make the argument that it is within the public service mission of the charity or the nonprofit. You can. I once heard someone say you could club baby seals and call it charity, and there's a lot of evidence that I don't know if that's actually the case, but you can fit a lot of things within a broad enough public service.
Wow.
So that is the.
Now I'm distracted.
Well, maybe you've got something to do right after this podcast ends. So there's rules, but some of it is a matter of interpretation. Some of it is a matter of just whether or not even the IRS chooses to investigate and enforce those rules. Now, in the case of the Christian Brotherhood newsletter, which was the first sharing ministry that Bruce Hawthorne set up, he made it a family business, essentially, which is not uncommon. Small businesses hire relatives. His small charity hired a lot of relatives. In the early 90s, his nephew, Dan Beers, came on board and moved into something called bill repricing. So in any insurance function, you've got to try to lower the cost of the care. Dan was ostensibly, at least, going to renegotiate all these bills to reduce the price. In the mid 90s, he formed a for-profit business that took over the function that he had supposedly been doing inside the Brotherhood newsletter, and had his for-profit do it for the sharing ministry, and was supposed to be paid just as, for all the savings that they were generating, a 15% essentially. But within a short period of time, he's auto deducting $55,000 a week to his private business from the sharing ministry. And the sharing ministry, they outsource
the function of negotiations with hospitals to an enterprise he sets up, and it turns out not to save money, but to actually cost exponentially more to his benefit.
And to push the sharing ministry to the brink of failure, because they were running short on money to actually pay people's bills.
Okay, and so and then what happens? He finds he can get away with that, and it just becomes a series of of ways of evacuating money from this nonprofit. It feels like.
Yes. So there was a huge amount of money flowing out, and it was also, Bruce Hawthorne separately was buying houses and assembling a huge, estate in north of Canton for friends and family. Eventually, some of the members of the board of his original charity, the Barberton Rescue Mission, are becoming concerned. and file a complaint with the Ohio Attorney General's office and asking them to conduct a charity investigation, which launches in around 1998 and takes 2 years, but it was a pretty rigorous investigation and finds essentially a cesspool of fraud and what they argue constitutes racketeering. I mean, organized criminal activity.
Money laundering.
Money laundering is
David,
one of the terms they use.
Yeah, walk us through that a little bit. And we should say, right, these board of directors did not have access to the books, I guess. So it wasn't sort of obvious like where all this money was going to them.
Yeah, in the case of the Christian Brotherhood newsletter, it was a much smaller operation than Liberty HealthShare, but as Ryan said, there was this side business that Dan Beers had set up that ostensibly was supposed to get about 15% of all the cost savings, but there was really no correlation between the work done and the money being pulled out of the nonprofit into the corporation. And once that money leaves a nonprofit and is in the hands of a for-profit, there's really no public insight into what happens to that money. So the AG's contention was that money's now been washed and it's been used to buy things like a jet and a family compound and 3 Honda Goldwing motorcycles, I believe, and other things. And what we found was when we looked at Liberty HealthShare, which is very recent, that there were similar things going on in terms of money leaving the nonprofit, going into 2 family-controlled businesses, and then that money being diffused across dozens of shell companies, and eventually ending up in, I think we got it in the headline, a pot farm and an airline and a bank and tons of other stuff. So they kind of figured out that this is something that they can get away with even after the AG investigation.
Yeah, well, what happened with that AG investigation? And this is back now. We're at 2000 or so, right? What came of that AG investigation? They find a cesspool. What did they do?
Well, they referred under Ohio state law. In some states, the Attorney General's office would just file criminal charges. In Ohio, there's law and practice that the AG does not file directly in a county. The county prosecutor has to do it. So they did that. They recommended more than 60 charges, criminal charges against Dan Beers in particular for fraud, theft, money laundering, an array of crimes. The local county prosecutors took up the case, and they had a little task force that was investigating. And for reasons that are not 100% clear, but partially, the sitting prosecutor who was interested in the case lost re-election. There was turnover in the staff. They lost the thread, essentially. The criminal case doesn't go anywhere, but the Attorney General's office proceeds and files a civil suit representing essentially the charity itself, and sues these individuals and accusing them of self-enrichment and fraud. And that case goes to trial. And in 2004, a jury held Hawthorne and Beers liable and found that they had committed fraud and fined Dan Beers $9.6 million that he was supposed to repay the charity. Wasn't
it Hawthorne that had to repay the charity and Beers?
Hawthorne had less. They in total, the two combined had $14 million in damages.
So, David, I know that Hawthorne escaped having to pay that by expiring, as it were. But what about Beers? Like, how did Beers end up not having to pay that, or has he?
He's paid a little bit very recently, but is evaded. He's a master at running away from liens. We found dozens of tax liens. People had sued him for various allegations of fraud. And, in this judgment, after it happened, he told the local newspaper, it doesn't mean we did anything wrong. So he kind of signaled that he didn't really take it seriously. And he continued to, be involved in like high stakes poker tournaments and so forth. I mean, you can run away from a civil judgment for quite some time. And it wasn't until it was obvious that he had income somehow related to Liberty HealthShare that he negotiated paying just a fraction of that settlement in installments with the Ohio Attorney General, and I believe Ryan, correct me. I believe he missed the last payment.
He hasn't made the most recent payment that was due, so it is unclear the status of whether his $9-something million in fines with interest is actually 20 million something now, but he struck a deal to pay $1 million, and he's supposed to have made another $200-something thousand payment several months ago, and it hasn't happened yet, at least.
I mean, how does this guy get away with it? I mean, is it because presumably, right, there's a lot of people out there who paid money into this charity, who joined the club or whatever it is, got a membership, got sick, did not get paid. Is it that when you do something nationally like this, as opposed to like it's in one community, there's far less sort of like political stakes involved for a specific attorney general to bring a charge against you and pursue it, or what is it? Is it that like it's so diffuse? You know, like, I mean, if this is all happening in one small community, there'd be a couple of reporters like you, theoretically, maybe at one time, maybe not so much, but maybe, who are going to pursue this in the community, and this is going to be the thing that you guys are doing. But because it's national, it's sort of diffuse. I mean, how does somebody get away with this?
Well, I mean, some of it just honestly is kind of gall. The ability to, I mean, in the case of
Gusto, like he's got a vibe. I love it.
Yeah. Well, so Dan Beers, after the Christian Brotherhood newsletter collapsed, he had several down years where, he got busted on misdemeanor, bouncing a $50 check to a grocery store. He says in the, stories he tells about himself that he was homeless for a time.
What did he do with all this money?
Well, that's an open question of where the $20-something million that he moved, that went from the newsletter to his private business went. At some point, it did. It appears to have been gone. Anyhow, by the time that they're launching Liberty HealthCare in 2013, 2014, sources are telling us that he was in the mix. He was in the meetings, but the people on the paperwork are his sister, Drudy Abel, and one of his best friends, Dale Bellis, who both had worked as executives at the Christian Brotherhood newsletter, but they're founding Liberty when it comes time for them to set up the businesses that Liberty will be paying, very similar to the way the Christian Brotherhood newsletter paid Dan Beers' business. It's his sons and his sons' friends' names on those companies, not his. His name isn't on anything. And that one-step removal, they seem to believe, alleviates either the legal concern or at least the appearance of impropriety.
Wow. It is a crazy story. And I mean, it's fascinating because I have been like hearing about these sort of shares. Did you guys ever come across one that works, that actually like is doing what it's supposed to do?
We've got a story coming out next week that talks a little more broadly about the industry, and we quote a couple people who, their contention is that these can work, and there are good actors, and that the Beers family has really, members of that family have taken advantage of this space, and it's pretty small, and since Congress has done away with the individual mandate, it said we all must have insurance.
Right.
Their appeal is really fading away. So I don't know how much longer they can really sustain market wise. But we didn't drill all the way down on all the health shares, but they all exist in this space where the IRS isn't very good at policing nonprofits. Insurance regulators don't look at them. They operate across state lines. It's really just a strange no man's land in terms of regulation. So you can get away with a lot.
Wow. David McSwane, Ryan Gabrielson, thanks so much for your time today. We'll put a link to the piece. It is, and we'll keep an eye out for this next one. A bit of a cautionary tale, maybe. I'm not sure how many of our listeners are doing this, but that's a little bit of a cautionary tale, and it's something to look out for when you're listening to Mark Levin or one of those other shows. You'll hear it advertised occasionally. Really appreciate your time today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break. Just want to remind you, we have a link to that horse farm that they rescue some horses and they provide therapy for folks, and they suffered a fire. And they're suffering from some illness. The father and husband has a severe illness. So if you can help them out, we have the link in the YouTube and podcast description and also on the website. Also, just a reminder, it is your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member. Join themajorityreport.com. When you do, you not only help the show survive and thrive, you also get the free show, free of commercials, and you get the fun half. So check that out. Don't forget justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. They started actually, coincidentally, maybe not that coincidentally, coincidentally, by representing farms in Chiapas, in Mexico, farmers, coffee farmers there, supportive, a lot of collectives there. I mean, Chiapas is, the, how would you call it? The most, I don't know, radically socialist area of Mexico, maybe? Maybe that's not, or at least that was. I mean, there was a lot of activity going on there. Maybe I'm dating myself a little bit, but more or less. And so a lot of very sort of like communal enterprises come out of that area in Chiapas. And Just Coffee was representing, was buying coffee from farms there, and is really great about making sure that these farms are supported by the coffee roasters, even when they have, weather issues or crop issues or whatnot. And so check it out, justcoffee.coop. It is the land of the Zapatistas, Noah from Tampa reminds me. And maybe someday we'll go into the whole Mexican Revolution and all of the Mexican history. But be that as it may, check out justcoffee.coop. Also, the GoFundMe for Rancho Evergreen Horse Sanctuary there in Chiapas. ESVN, Kevin Durant apparently coming back, playing tonight, coming off the injury list.
First game tonight. There was a special guest host on Monday, our very own Matt Leck, while I was at the office. Fun episode, doing a little NBA recap update, predictions and everything for the home stretch of the season. Thank you for doing that, Matt. That was very, very fun.
Of course.
YouTube.com/ESVN show. No Thursday show this week, but we will be back Monday.
All right, there you go. Matt, what's happening in the Matt Leck Media?
Matt Leck Media, we had Amina Sheikh on to talk about Canada stuff. Also in the postgame, I did a little dive into landlord TikTok. For instance, like, should you tip your landlord? Why your landlord's actually...
Should you tip your landlord?
Yep, this is just the questions that are being asked on
TikTok.
TikTok. So,
who's asking that question? Your landlord?
The landlord's
I
landlord
bet.
TikTok saying, hey, if you tip a guy for giving you a coffee, why don't you tip your landlord? And I would just say, because I'm paying my landlord over $2,000 a month, and I'm not doing that to my barista. But anyway, patreon.com/leftreckoning. Also, leftreckoning.com/store. We have a sale on, if you go all caps last ride, one word, you can get 15% off of your Left Reckoning items, some of which are going to be retired soon, particularly the Willie Nelson Burney shirt. So you might want to go check that out now.
Whoa. You guys really got the merch side of that enterprise.
The merch is
down,
we got
really.
another run on merch for lately, so people like deals where they can type in a code. I found out.
Yeah, I want to find out how you do that code thing because I want to introduce codes.
Last ride.
What? I mean, how do you come up with a code? I mean, I'm talking about how do you.
I'm just saying our code is last ride.
Yeah. 646-257-3920 is the number. See you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Anarchy. Alpha males are back. Boys back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boys back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it to my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
We bring back DJ Denner.
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Denner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. You see white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males.
Psych. Fuck them. Oh.
Snowflake says what?
What?